Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Simon, for his kind words. It's always a bit terrifying having what you've written quoted at you, because you keep thinking, did I write that? Well, it sounds like the sort of thing I might have written anyway. But I was going to talk tonight about big subjects, the power of the wealthy to silence critics, the conflict between religious dogmatism and freedom of thought, and the determination of dictators and some democratic governments to persecute dissent. These are big themes. These are great themes that have inspired philosophers through the centuries, and they've also inspired some great but perhaps unrecognised philosophers. I refer, of course, to the creators of the South Park cartoon series, who in 2005 broadcast perhaps my favourite episode. It's called Trapped in the Closet. And I don't know if you've seen South Park. It always features this little boy. It's a little boy called Stan, and he's walking through his American city, and he passes a Scientologist testing centre. I'm not sure if there is one in Oxford. There's certainly one in London. They sort of lure in the gullible, and they give you these very spurious tests. And when Stan goes in, his tests, the readings are off the graph, and the Scientologists are convinced this little boy is the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of the Scientology cult. And this, of course, gives the writers on South Park tremendous fun, because first of all, they can reveal all the secrets of Scientology, which normally initiates have to spend tens and tens of thousands of dollars. Well, they're finally told that 75 million years ago, an evil alien emperor called, I better check this, Xenu, filled DC-10s. I have to explain to the young people in here, DC-10s were the height of aviation technology in the 1950s and 1960s when L. Ron Hubbard was constructing his religion. Now, perhaps less so. Now, if you're an evil intergalactic emperor, you probably use something more advanced with DC-10s. Anyway, he fills the DC-10s with his enemies, crashes them into Earth's volcanoes, then nukes the volcanoes, and the souls of Xenu's enemies inhabit all of mankind. And only by paying yet more tens of thousands of dollars will the Scientologists finally exorcise these demons from you. It's a very rough thing. Anyway, little boy is reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, and Scientologists gather on his lawn, much to his parents' surprise, to worship him. And John Travolta and Tom Cruise burst into his house, and unfortunately, Tom Cruise turns to the little boy and says, L. Ron, what do you think of my acting? The little boy says, well, it's okay, I guess, but not as good as Leonardo DiCaprio. And this insult to his acting from the Messiah, from L. Ron Hubbard, Tom Cruise runs into the wardrobe, allowing the rest of the cast to shout for the rest of the show, Tom Cruise, come out of the closet. Tom, we know you're in the closet, it doesn't matter, come out. And no one cares anymore. And finally at the end, little boy says, I want nothing to do with Scientology. It's a great, fat, global scam. At which point Tom Cruise, infuriated by this insult to Scientology, finally does come out of the closet and says, I'm going to sue you for that. Then with an in-joke, I don't think many people would have got in the mail, he said, yeah, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue you in England. And of course, English libel law, even to the creators of South Park, is just legendary around the world for its ferocity. Tom Cruise couldn't sue a little boy in America because it has a First Amendment, which I always say, I say at the end of this book, you know, for all the crimes and corruptions of American democracy, if you ever have a chance to pass one law, pass the First Amendment, guaranteeing freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, and freedom of association. We could do those things in Britain. And to make the joke complete, Trapped in the Closet was, of course, the one episode of South Park that was never shown in Britain. It was actually pulled from the satellite distributor in case the Scientologists sued for libel in England. Just because Scientologists is a great big fat global scam, as any editor will tell you, you think very hard before writing about them, because they will sue. They might lose, but you can spend tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds before they sue. Once again, Tom Cruise could sue for the implication that when little boy's parents were shouting, Tom Cruise, why don't you come out of the closet? That wasn't just a simple request to leave the wardrobe. There was something else in there. And trust me, British judges who've opened the libel courts to Russian oligarchs, to Saudi petro-billionaires, to Roman Polanski when he was even on the run for abusing a 13-year-old girl, raping a 13-year-old girl, if we're going to use the English language accurately, would have certainly welcomed Tom Cruise in. So in that, I have to admire the writers of Southpark for just getting all the themes of my book into one episode. You have the power of God, the power of religion. Scientology cannot, as religions have in the past, persecute heretics and blasphemers or burn them, but it will use every legal tactic it can, the kind of religious lawfare, to stop them. You have the power of money, the ability of a wealthy Hollywood actor to come to London and use his money to fund a lawsuit, a libel suit that could easily cost £1 million, easily. And then again you have the odd attitude of the British state that allows this to happen, which has allowed these libel laws to exist for so long, although I'm part of a rather inspiring campaign to change that and get libel reform. I'm a bit worried. I've always considered myself to be the patron saint of lost causes, but it might actually be a cause we win, which will be something. But still, God, money, state, the three forces that cramp human freedom, limit what people can say and people can do. I begin this book, or early in this book, I ask a question. I say, do you believe in freedom of speech? And then I add, are you sure you do? Are you sure you believe in freedom of speech? Because I imagine, I don't want to make presumption about you, but I imagine most people in this room would say, isn't it absurd we can't watch an episode of South Park, which can be shown everywhere else in the world because of fears of libel. But what would you say if a young British novelist of Bangladeshi or Pakistani heritage were to write a book renouncing his tradition, write a book condemning the religion he was brought up in, mocking its founding myths, and the normal, or indeed a young British Indian novelist were to write a book criticising the founding myths of Hinduism or Sikhism? Would you, and the usual death threats and threats of violence followed, would you defend it? And defend the rights of all writers to write what they want and all readers to read what they want and indeed publishers to publish what they want? Or would you say there's any violence that follows, any death threats? The novelist had brought him on himself, if you're right-wing, because that's what the right said about Salman Rushdie after Standing Versus. You've brought him on yourself. All these costs to Britain, all this trouble to Britain, you uppity left-wing foreigner, you've brought it all on yourself. You are to blame. Or would you, if you're left-wing, say, we cannot possibly defend a novel that is critical of Islam or Hinduism because that is culturally insensitive. You're a cultural imperialist. You're somehow a kind of agent of the CIA if you criticise the religion of people who are generally put upon, although not, one should add, when they have power themselves in Iran or Saudi Arabia or those states of India where Hindu nationalism is so strong that it's actually a criminal offence to convert people from Hinduism. I guess that lots of people here are students, but those who aren't students, can I ask you, in your workplace, would you be happy to denounce your employer in public? Would you expect me to denounce my employers, The Guardian, The Observer, in public? We can all criticise politicians in this country. We shouldn't be grateful for that. That's a freedom that's been won over centuries. I can stand up here and denounce David Cameron. You can denounce Ed Miliband. We don't worry that the secret police will come for us. But if we criticise our employers, it's taken as read that our careers might suffer. It wouldn't be exceptional if we were sacked. Even in exceptional cases of whistleblowing, people take it for granted that you're not just sacked, but you just never work in your line of work again because you've proven your disloyalty to one manager, to one hierarchy. What other manager, what other hierarchy would want you on their team? Now, it might be that our criticism of our employer is motivated on malice or frustrated ambition or is just bitchy or gossipy. On the other hand, we might be speaking out in the public interest. We might even be speaking out in the organisation's interest. I mean, just look at the case this week of the BBC and Jimmy Savile. Yeah, if the editor of Newsnight had had run his reporter's investigation, had broken the story of Jimmy Savile's abuse of girls, the BBC would be in an entirely different light. The BBC was thinking, okay, Savile used to work for the BBC, used to be a BBC star, but at least the BBC is cleaning its own stables. At least the BBC is bringing this out. Now, the editor of Newsnight suppresses it. We're not quite sure why, but having worked in hierarchical organisations, I'm sure most people in this room would not be too surprised if they guessed at the end he thought, well, his superiors, he's a middle manager, the upper middle management, the senior middle management would not like this one little bit if Newsnight broadcast something against the BBC. But then all of a sudden it turns out that whistleblowing, telling the truth about an organisation, is actually in an organisation's interest. Meanwhile, what of the state? I won't talk to you about problems that probably still the majority of the world's population have, with just no political freedom, no real rights to criticise the states they live in. But what of the British state? We're meant to be a liberal democracy, and the guiding principle of liberalism when it comes to free speech was magnificently enunciated by John Stuart Mill in the 19th century. And his principle was that you should be free to think and say whatever you want to think and write and say, unless you're inciting a crime. Now, the example Mill gave to show this was the example of corn dealers. Corn dealers were sort of the bankers of the early 19th century. They were hugely hated by the poor, who used to accuse them of whacking up the price of bread so they could enrich themselves while people were close to starvation. And the radical agitators of the early and mid-19th century would always target corn merchants as the bloodsuckers, the people who grew rich on the backs of a hungry population. Now, the governments of the day, fearful of riot, fearful indeed of revolution, naturally wanted to stop radical journalists attacking corn dealers. And Mill said this. Mill said, look, you just can't do that in a free society. The only time you can do it is if a radical agitator is denouncing corn dealers outside a corn dealer's home. In other words, if he's inciting a mob. Now notice, that's not saying then the police can move in and arrest him because he's inciting violence, and violence is a crime. He's inciting arson, he's inciting housebreaking. But otherwise, he must be free to say what he wants, even if it's unfair, even if it's untrue, even if corn dealers are just responding to a bad harvest and putting the price up. It is better for individuals to have the freedom to hold their own beliefs, and better for society as a whole to have arguments argued out in public. So bad arguments can be exposed, and good arguments can be tested in the heat of intellectual battle. Well, that's not really happening in Britain at the moment. It seems like every couple of weeks, perhaps every month, there's an extraordinary case of someone just picked up and arrested and charged for what they've said on Twitter or what they've put on Facebook. I was quite involved with a very nice guy called Paul Chambers, who was he worked in a marketing department in the north of England. He'd met this very nice girl from Northern Ireland. They'd sort of set up a date. He was going to fly from Robin Hood Airport to Belfast to, have boy meets girl and what have you. And on the TV news, just before he was due to fly, he was due to fly in January, a week before he was due to fly, there's a local news report saying snow has closed Robin Hood Airport. And Paul is just on Twitter. He hasn't got many Twitter followers. They're essentially his friends. They're almost like the friends he'd meet in a pub. And he just tweets, shit, Robin Hood Airport's closed. If you don't get your act together in a week, when he's going to go and see his girlfriend, I'm going to blow you sky high. Double exclamation mark. Show it's a joke. It's not a very good joke, but it's the kind of thing a bloke might say in a pub, as TV news comes on, he says it to their friends, they go, ha ha, Paul, ignore it, carry on. But because he said it on Twitter, an airport manager doing a a Twitter search. You can search Twitter for all mentions of your name or mentions of your university. Finds this. He thinks it's a joke. He passes it to the security manager, who also thinks it's a joke. So it's a non-credible threat. But the rules say it must be brought to the police, sent to the police. The police, the anti-terrorist police, then arrest Paul in his workplace, and then they say it's a joke. But incidentally, Paul's employer then fires him because the police have come into the workplace to arrest him. But still, the Crown Prosecution Service prosecutes him, even though no one doubts it's anything other than just a bad piece of banter. He's prosecuted. He's convicted. Paul then finally gets to Northern Ireland to see his girlfriend Sarah. They become an item. It's all quite sweet. Until Paul, who's been picked up by people like me, by lawyers, by Stephen Fry, by Al Murray, the pub landlord, is persuaded to appeal. So he goes to his employers in Northern Ireland and says, well, I might be in the papers next week because there's this appeal coming up about me blowing up an airport. Belfast is really not the best place to say that. And he's fired again. So he's lost 2 jobs, got a criminal record, all for making a bad joke on Twitter. And finally it gets the Lord Chief Justice sitting in the court with Stephen Fry just staring at him. And the Lord Chief Justice acquits. Okay, there's a case going on at the moment about a chap called Adrian Smith, who's Christian, a Christian conservative. He works for the Trafford Housing Trust. He just puts on his Facebook page, in quite moderate terms, his opposition to gay marriage. His employers see it, and they downgrade him. He's demoted. He loses £13,000 a year. In other words, he's had a rolling £13,000 fine for stating his opinion on Facebook. Now, one of the problems I had in the reception of this book was very nice, had very good reviews, always a great pleasure. But a couple of critics said, but come on, Nick, don't you understand how the web has changed everything? And I don't seek to dispute that in this book. In some ways, I think to people under 30 in this room, the arguments about whether the web's a force for good or is a force for bad must seem entirely irrelevant. It just is. It's like the weather. It's just there. But my critics said, but look, the web sort of makes all the old arguments we've had from John Milton in this country onwards, all the old arguments about what protections you need for freedom of speech, how laws should be written, what constitutions you should have. It makes them all irrelevant. It just doesn't matter anymore. For instance, Ryan Giggs has an affair with his brother's sister. He tries to his brother's wife. That would be too much. His brother's wife. He tries to get a super injunction to suppress it. It leaks out on Twitter. It's printed abroad. You can't hold things anymore. Wikipedia can print 250,000 pages of State Department documents. Something would be impossible in the 20th century. You just couldn't have done it. In the Arab Spring, videos, Facebook pages spur on revolutionary movements. All of that's true. But if you just consider that the internet changed a lot, it doesn't change the need for politics. For example, this time last year, there were heartbreakingly brave Syrian revolutionaries at the start of Assad's terror who were just going out with cameras or even mobile phones and filming it all and putting it all online. Now, that's great, that's interesting. Reporters couldn't even get into Syria, it's too dangerous. That doesn't mean that Syrian revolutionaries don't need to fight and win a revolution. If, for instance, and this is a hypothetical, I must stress for any lawyers in the audience, if, for instance, a bigwig in Oxford was corrupt and no newspaper dared print details of his corruption, and it appeared on some obscure website. Yes, that's interesting. Yes, that couldn't happen before the web. But if you wanted to do something about that bigwig, you couldn't just be an anonymous poster on the internet. You would have to go outside and campaign about him. And when you did, you would find that the laws of the land, whether there's a public interest defence, whether we have strict laws governing libel or not, matter hugely to you. The web doesn't solve your problem there. Only changes only changes regime in countries like Syria, only changes in the law in countries like Britain will solve that problem for you. Now, there's a second problem I think is true of freedom of speech. Now, it might be me being a journalist in Media London, which is not a very happy place. If it were a neighbourhood, you'd want to move out it. But go back to those 2 examples I gave. Paul, I would imagine, Paul Chambers, who makes a bad joke on Twitter, all of you who are left-wing or liberal will think this is outrageous, isn't it ridiculous? You might be, and perhaps I'm doing you a disservice, you might be a little less concerned about defending Adrian Smith because he's a very conservative Christian, and you wouldn't really call him a homophobe, but he doesn't want to give equal rights to homosexuals. Or vice versa, if you were conservative, you might be far more concerned about Adrian Smith. You might say to Paul, well, you know, there's quite a bad terrorism threat about. You shouldn't make jokes about blowing up airports. You know, you deserve what you've got. And this is, I think, in Britain and America, a huge, huge difficulty of freedom of speech. It is highly politicised. It's very rare you find true liberals who just defend it in all circumstances. You do find them all across the political spectrum. But, you know, it is, on the whole, people believe in freedom of speech for their friends and allies. They believe in freedom of speech for people who agree with them and are a little, and perhaps to be equally concerned with people who disagree with them and still receive unwarranted punishments, because the failure to defend freedom of speech within John Stuart Mill's limits, I don't believe in child pornography because children can't give consent. I don't think you've got a right to spew out anti-Jewish sermons outside a synagogue or anti-Islamic sermons outside a mosque. But within the limits, within normal liberal limits, once those are broken, the consequences for society can be very grave indeed. Because of the sort of political divide in all this, I will give you two examples. One to please the left-wingers in the audience, one to please the more conservative-minded among you. I will pander to the left first, if I may, and talk about the banking crisis. I mean, one of the most the crisis of 2007-8 is remarkable for many, many things, for its scale, for the way it's ruined societies, for the way it's ruined the help of the young, something you're particularly conscious of in a university, just how different the prospects are for children who come to university in 2012 rather than in 2006. But the most remarkable thing about it, from my point of view, is it happens virtually without warning. I mean, afterwards, newspapers were scrabbling around trying to find, there were a few journalists here or there who warned about it. But you cannot say that there was mounting concern about a crisis coming in the banks. It's just impossible. And there are lots of reasons for that. One of the main reasons is, to go back to what I was saying earlier, is that any one working in a bank who issued any kind of warning, even an internal warning, let alone a public warning, would have been fired. There was a very good comment in the New York Times after the crisis. They did a big in-depth investigation into how on earth American banks could have lent billions and billions of dollars in subprime mortgages. That is, if you strip away the jargon, lent billions and billions of dollars to people who could never possibly pay the money back. And what they were doing is they kept thinking they were passing the parcel, and then they were doing all kinds of derivatives trades on top of it, and the merry-go-round would never stop until, of course, it does. And one Wall Street derivatives trader said this: a risk manager once told me, because all these deals had to be approved by a risk manager. There was the illusion of prudent banking. There were risk departments, risk managers, and when a deal was made to lend billions of dollars to people who couldn't possibly pay it back, that had to be ticked off. The risk manager had to approve it. And this chap said, a risk manager once told me that to raise an issue that undermined the bank's multi-million-dollar profits would have been to sign his own death warrant. And that was true in Britain as well. There was a Royal Bank of Scotland, senior people at the Royal Bank of Scotland realised that Goodwin was leading the bank towards ruin. But to use my analogy about going to work, you leave a democracy and a dictatorship. It was a dictatorship in the Royal Bank of Scotland. You couldn't speak out of turn. At meetings, Goodwin would pick on someone, anyone, and then richly humiliate him or her, just to pour encourage les autres. And I know, and people just didn't talk out. I mean, I've got contacts in the Royal Bank of Scotland who said, Nick, you don't understand. If you had spoken out, they used to say you're a member of the anti-profit brigade. And those are the most chilling words, because you weren't supporting Goodwin. Anti-profit brigade, that means what were you doing trying to bring down Royal Bank of Scotland's profit, you shouldn't be working here. At HBOS, there was a wonderful man called Paul Moore, who was the bank's risk manager. And Paul, who was extraordinary experience in the field, the top man in the country in his field. And he goes around the Halifax Building Society and he sees the Halifax throwing out mortgages, sometimes mortgages worth more than the value of the house, 110% mortgages, 25% mortgages. And then he looks at the people who are doing it, and they're all in sales teams who are incentivized to, the more mortgages you sell, the more bigger your bonus. The more mortgages you sell, the better you've done. If you don't sell mortgages, you have to wear a dunce's cap in the office, and you're mocked and laughed. And Paul went to James Crosby, the head of Halifax, and said, look, I'm your risk manager. I have to tell you, this is insanely risky. How do you know that people getting these mortgages can pay you back? You're not checking them out properly. This isn't prudent banking. And James Crosby took what he said on board and then fired him. So the risk manager of the Halifax was fired for warning of a risk. Now, what happened to these two men was rather instructive. Paul went out onto the street, burst into tears, wondered how on earth he was going to tell his wife he had lost his job. He goes back to his home in Yorkshire and he never gets another job in banking again. Better than that, no headhunter even phones him up to see if you consider applying for a job in banking again. He'd broken the omerta of the executive class. He'd behaved badly. James Crosby, on the other hand, is taken by Gordon Brown to Buckingham Palace to be knighted by no less a personage than Her Majesty the Queen. And he's considered a great champion of the city until the moment the Halifax crashes, and then Parliament suddenly says to Paul, you better come in and tell us what was happening. Well, to any radical in the audience, the moral of this story is clear. Smash the hierarchy, occupy, resist, and fight the man. And in the case of finance, incidentally, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think we ought to regard high finance, banks that are effectively underwritten by the taxpayer, as hostile foreign powers, as institutions that can bring down the country. And just as we would spy on a hostile foreign power and encourage dissent, so we should encourage people to speak out, to whistleblow, to leak within banks. But before we raise the Scarlet Banner high and sing the Internationale, let us consider the left's reaction to ultra-reactionary religion. Let us look at that. Let us look at the God part. We looked at money. Let us look at the God part of censorship. One of the most remarkable features of my time in journalism has been how, when confronted with militant religion, particularly militant Islam, instead of having right-wing papers defend it and make excuses for it, or right-wing politicians, you find left-wing politicians, left-wing intellectuals, left-wing newspapers and magazines excusing or indulging doctrines that, for someone of my generation, would have no problem of calling far right. That you want to, the doctrines that say you should subjugate the women, doctrines that say you should kill homosexuals, you should kill Jews, you should kill any Muslim who of his or her own free will decides to change their religion or indeed have no religion at all. They're apostates and they should be killed. This relates very keenly to debates about censorship, in that I'm not saying that militant Islam is the only violent force in Europe. You only have to look at Anders Breivik's massacre in Norway, see there are others. It is the only force, that paramilitary force, that targets novelists, writers, intellectuals, artists. If we were in India, it would be slightly different. If we were in India, at an Indian university, you would probably be as worried by Hindu nationalism. You would know about how Hindu nationalists have persecuted Indian artists, murdered Muslims indeed, and persecuted historians who try and tell the truth, who try and confront the myths of Indian nationalism. In Britain, it is at the moment mainly militant Islam. And I could go on and on about the famous cases on all this, the Ironhurst, the Alis, and the Salman Rushdies, which were my book. But if I could just emphasise how bad things have got, let me look about two cases you probably haven't have heard of. There's a wonderful Norwegian singer from a Pakistani family called Dea. She's great. And she starts singing in Norway when she's 17. And suddenly, old men, violent old men, start disrupting her concerts because she's a Pakistani girl and a Muslim girl. She's not meant to be singing, she's not meant to be wearing skimpy clothing, she just wants to be a pop star. She's marketed as a Muslim Madonna. And she's driven out of Norway. She comes to Britain, and rather touchingly, Dea had been to Britain as a child, and she kept seeing Asian women wearing mini skirts and high heels and thought everything was a lot freer in Britain than it was in Norway. Well, she was soon very sorely disillusioned. I mean, there were campaigns ran against her, there were threats to her in theatres, and Dea, she finally flees off to America and goes and lives in a southern city. She's really traumatised by it all and very frightened because she gets the usual death threats and everything. And she's now pulled herself together, and she's a very admirable campaigner for women's rights, particularly for against honour killings, misnomer if ever there was one, and the rights of women who are forced into marriage. And the point I make in the book is, imagine this had to happen to a white singer in Britain. Imagine if a young, talented, very beautiful white singer had been targeted by the BNP and the English Defence League. Imagine if she had been driven to country to country. You would never hear the end of her. She'd be all over the BBC. But because there's this fear of tackling reactionary policies in other cultures, she's virtually unknown. And although people say this fear shows they're anti-racist, the results are really quite racist. There's one law and one rule and one standard of treatment for women with white skins, and another for women with brown skins, which I thought was what we were meant to be fighting against. The other example I want to give is, I hope to make this a little bit wider. One of the censorship isn't always about the big pitched battles, like with Pussy Riot in Moscow, or indeed Salmon and the Satanic Verses. When censorship really kicks in, and I would say this much applies to censorship for people working in corporate hierarchies and bureaucracies, it's the randomness of it that can be frightening. It's almost like, I think there was one the other day, you know how these things, every now and again there's a story from America about someone going mad in a school with an automatic weapon and killing loads of people. They're normally postmen for reasons people can't begin to explain, but it's called going postal. And when someone goes postal, there's an explanation for why they've done something. But the explanation is so tiny in comparison to the violence caused. It barely makes sense. It's a rational reason, but it's it fails to get into proportion the atrocities it committed. A lot of censorship systems are like that. A lot of censorship systems go postal because what they're trying to say when they do that is, actually, the safest course is to do nothing at all. It's to just steer clear of this subject. There was an example from Mugabe's Zimbabwe, where often Mugabe could be relatively liberal. There are moments of civil peace. There are moments when the Zimbabwean press can criticise him. Opposition politics are free. But when he wants to clamp down, he goes postal. And the last time this happened, there was a guy who was arrested when he saw two little boys who were wearing T-shirts with pictures of Mugabe on them. And he said to the little boys, why on earth do you want a picture of that wizened old man on your T-shirt? Boom, he's arrested. Now, in situations like that, people then realise it's best to just say nothing at all, because you no longer know. There are no limits, there are no rules, there are no boundaries. You don't know where the boundary is, you don't know when to cross. In stable dictatorships, it's often the case. I mean, after the death of Stalin in Eastern Europe, dictators could make the most brilliant films because they knew where the rules were, they knew how they could subvert them, but the state wasn't being postal, the state wasn't being violent. In Iran at times, Iranian cinema has produced some good films with a political message just beneath the surface, when the state isn't being too crazy. It's when people go crazy, when they go postal, that you just back off. you don't even talk about politics, you don't even talk about religion. And the example I want to give to you of this is a book called The Jewel of Medina by one Sherry Jones. It's a romantic novel for women's market. I mean, seriously, grumpy middle-aged old journalists were not the target audience at all. And I found, I don't know if you notice, when you buy something on Amazon, you get Amazon recommend. So after buying this book to research censorship, I got recommended of, you know, bodices and tatters and breeches on fire and stuff like that. But anyway, and Sherry is the sweetest woman you've ever met. She's an American journalist from the West. Like many journalists, she wanted to break out and write a novel. And she wrote a novel about Aisha, who was the Prophet Muhammad's fourth wife. She got a $100,000 book deal from Random House, and it all seems set. Now, Aisha is engaged to Muhammad when she's 6 and marries him when she's 9. Now, this could cause problems for a modern audience, but Sherry actually said in an interview that her purpose in writing the book was to show that Muhammad was fairly egalitarian in his attitudes to women and had got a bad rap from feminists. And she went on to say how she wanted to bring Christians, Muslims, Jews, everyone together to achieve paradise here on earth. So a bit sugary, but you know, I mean, there are worse sentiments to have. And she got round the whole problem of an old man marrying a girl by describing in the book how as soon as she's married, Muhammad says, no, I can't see you now. She goes back to live with her parents. The girl reaches puberty, Aisha reaches puberty, but still the marriage isn't consummated. And I'll give you a piece of a typical Jonesian prose. She has Aisha saying, each day flowered with hope. Would Muhammad visit me today, then dropped its petals like tears. The weeks dragged by like a funeral procession. The inexorable sun trudged upward, dragging the day in its wake. Outside, a vulture's cry impaled my waning hopes. As I said, it's not really my type of writing, but you can see what she's trying to do. It's only when Aisha is 14, only when she is ready that the marriage is consummated. It could not be nicer. It could not be more polite. Anyway, so poor old Sherry sends her book into Random House, who are delighted, and then she sends it out to academics. She's done a good job. You know, she's researched what we know about 7th century Arabia to bring along. And lots of academics thanked the back of the book. And one academic at the University of Texas, a white academic, sees this novel and goes wild. She starts desperately emailing Random House, saying this book was insult to all Muslims. It would be a national security disaster for America. They had to pull it. And Random House, in the land of the free and the home of the brave and land of the First Amendment, promptly did pull it. And the academic in Texas says to a Muslim colleague of hers, this book is an insult to Islam. And this rather confused Muslim press puts on his website, so I've just been told by Denise that a book's coming out, Apparent New Sectarian Verses, an insult to Islam. But then everything calms down, and the Muslim academic meets Sherry Jones. The last thing she wants to do is write Islam. They all get on terribly well. Then other publishers realise that Random House has not just failed to defend the principles of freedom of speech, freedom of press. They've done something far, far worse. They've missed an opportunity to make money. And then rival publishers then print The Jewel of Medina, and the rights are sold around the world, and the rights are sold to Britain. And everything seems to be fine. Except that, when a British publisher publishes it, 3 men under surveillance from MI5, because they've been involved in demonstrations against the Danish cartoons, including carrying little babies with caps on their heads saying, I love Al-Qaeda, firebomb the British publisher's house. The very fact that somewhere on the web, someone has said this book is an insult to Islam, even though it's not, even though the Muslim academic who wrote it in perfectly good faith, and you can't blame him at all, then says, no, it's not to be ridiculous, she's a very nice woman. Everyone's getting along fine. That's enough for random violence to begin. That is enough to sort of go postal. A novelist from the white American West writes a book, a university academic in Texas denounces it, a home is bombed in London. In those circumstances, with things like that, people just back off. They back away from everything. Why? One of the problems, and this applies to all forms of censorship, is fear comes in many levels. The fear of confronting censorship and self-censorship comes in many levels. There's a fear of violence. That affects writers, academics, very much. People don't go into academia or into writing because like they join the police force or join the army. They don't have weapons. They don't have colleagues at the disposal with weapons. They often work from home with their family. Look what happened to Rushdie as soon as the Fatwa against Satanic Verses come on. His marriage breaks up. He's moved from house to house to house, for years. They don't want that. But it's not just the fear of violence. There's the fear of breaking with the crowd. If everyone is at your workplace is saying the boss is marvellous, do you want to break with them? If everyone around you is saying, in your university, this is quite bad in universities, is saying you can't say this, do you really want to break with them? It's a lot of the controls on us are social rather than coercive. People on the whole don't like breaking with friends, breaking with colleagues, speaking out of turn. And then there's a very real fear of giving comfort to your enemies, to your opponents. I mean, look at the examples I've said. There are undoubtedly racists in Europe, and you can tell they are racist and never offer any support to liberal Muslims or liberal ex-Muslims, who I've seen people suddenly develop from the right develop most extraordinary concerns for gay rights. Most extraordinary. I said, you never had that concern before. That's because they want to use it to attack immigrants who have an anti-gay ideology, and you don't want to give people like that comfort, often for good reason. There's a final fear, which I think afflicts British culture and Western culture particularly badly. We have a very phony culture in the West, in the arts, in journalism. Writers, novelists, directors, always like to boast about how courageous they are, how we pose as brave speakers of truth to power. We talk about transgressing boundaries and smashing taboos and fighting establishments as if we're somehow dissidents in the revolutionary underground, which we're not. But one of the consequences of that is people are very frightened of admitting they're afraid. Simon and I were talking about this, before with comedians who can never admit that they don't do certain types of jokes because they're frightened. Because they're frightened of a violent reaction. Because then where does all our brave speaking truth to power image go? Where does that happen? What do our audience think of us if we admit that? What would happen if, I don't know, the BBC's business correspondent was to come on and say, well, look, it could well be that Barclays Bank will be the next to go. But we can't possibly report that because the BBC cannot begin to fight a libel action. It costs us £1 million. We can't afford to do it. The audience think, what? You either report it or you don't. You would look terrible. And this fear of appearing afraid has a very, very bad consequence, because obviously fear is lessened the more people speak out. The more people speak out against an iniquity or an oppressive power, the less iniquitous and less oppressive that power is. And sometimes the first step towards speaking out can be just to admit that censorship exists. Just to say, well, look, here is this topic. I ought to cover it. I ought to write about it. I ought to talk about it, but I'm frightened because people in position of power or people in position to impose violence will attack me if I do. That might seem a little cowardly. At least you're admitting the fact of censorship. At least you're admitting it's there. At least you're carrying on and not pretending that everything's fine. And of course, the more people who admit it, the less reason there is to be afraid. Now, I hope I've convinced you that we would be a better society if there was more freedom to speak up against religious obscurantism, against the extraordinary hierarchies we have in Britain, which seek to protect themselves and their privileges by limiting freedom of speech. I hope we would have a better society. We didn't have people who are genuinely afraid of Britain speaking their minds, which we do have. But I want to end by conceding a point. John Stuart Mill, who I quoted at the beginning, was very much a 19th century optimist. He came from the high point of Victorian liberal self-confidence. And to him it was self-evident. To him it was self-evident that the more freer debate was, the more fuller people were, the more fuller lives people were. It's not so self-evident. I fully accept that people can suffer psychic wounds. You might be, if you're at work, delight in some whistleblower revealing all your manager's secrets. You might be less delighted when your rivals profit from it and you're threatened with losing your job. You might, there are people who, if their deeply felt political or religious beliefs are criticised, suffer some kind of psychic wound. It is a greater affront to them. There was a left-wing journalist, Muslim journalist, saying the other day, he finds criticism of Muhammad harder to take than criticism of his own children. I accept those feelings are real. However, that is not the liberal society we have fought to get. Would you accept it anywhere else? I mean, would you accept in science people saying, no, there's some thoughts you can have, there's some you can't. Scientific knowledge is based wholly on people fighting out arguments, regardless of position or place. You can be a Nobel Prize winner. You put forward a stupid idea in physics, your colleagues will tear you apart and feel free to part. University life should be, and sometimes is, based on the same principle. You are free to you are free to debate ideas without fear or favour. The fact that your professor says something doesn't mean it's true. Your professor has to prove it's true. And an appeal to authority, appeal saying, I am your professor, is not good enough. I'm your professor, believe me. No, you're my professor, you show me. And you take on all objections. People do have political identities. I've known this. I've had this sort of identity myself for some time. There are people who are such convinced conservatives or such convinced leftists that they find any criticism of their political beliefs a kind of personal affront. It inflicts a kind of personal wound when they hear them mocked or disputed on the Today programme or wherever. Do you want to say, well, we should have laws protecting believers in political idea from insult or offence, or laws saying we should respect certain political ideologies? I hope you wouldn't, because there are societies where they exist and we have no problem in calling them dictatorships. Even in our personal life, obviously, we are social animals. Obviously, we don't say everything that comes into our mind. We don't have complete freedom of speech. If you were to say that the man next to you was ugly or the woman next to you smelled, if you were to say everything that came into your head straight away, you'd find yourself friendless within a week. We control our thoughts. We're social animals. Our language is conditioned by people around them. But even in our personal life, there are times when we have to tell uncomfortable truths, which cause offence. You know, I'm sure you've had experience yourself. That is because, although you cannot always prove that free societies and freedom of speech make people happier, they do make people more grown up. They don't infantilise. They acknowledge that you're responsible for your thoughts, responsible for your actions. They acknowledge your autonomy. They don't say, well, we'll treat these employees like children, who have to say what teacher says. We'll treat these members of this religious or ethnic bloc as if they're children who can't hear hard truths. We will protect them. But really we're insulting them. Really we're saying you're not as superior as us. You can't handle the debates that we can handle. The liberation that comes from a free society, what I'm trying to say, is not always happy. They may not always be happy for certain individuals, but they are essential. And it's in hope of encouraging that liberation that I've written my book, which I don't seem to have here, which also be outside. Yes, there it is. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick.
How do I do for time?
No, it's perfect. I'm going to chair a question and answer session for a few minutes. I want to kick off with just one question myself, is okay. I remember certain politicians describing themselves as conviction politicians. Does that part and parcel of your concern about politicians or people who are political, who wear their political allegiances so tightly to their personality? You know, they take it as an affront if you argue with them.
I'm not criticising them for being conviction politicians. Right. I'm just saying that the notion that you can't cause offence to deeply held beliefs, that a lot of people have deeply held political beliefs, and they genuinely find mockery of them, criticism of them offensive. I mean, I plead guilty to this. You know, at times in my life, I've done that, and you wouldn't have a law saying, you know, we must spare their feelings. We must not offend them. Yeah. Because if you did, that would be a dictatorial system. You say, what we say is, what free societies say is, ideas about politics and religion, and I would say about business as well, and employment, are just too important. They're just too important. You cannot protect them with laws or treat them with kid gloves or tell soothing white lies about them. Because these are systems that can affect the lives of everyone. They can oppress people. They can oppress, particularly religion. They can oppress women. You know, I mean, it's just too important. It's just too important to back off from.
One of the things that Nick's book ends with, if you don't know it already, is advice, is practical tips, really, for free-speaking citizens at the end. This isn't out of personal concern, of course, because I'm worried my own bosses are listening. But what should people do in the workplace to fight for freedom of expression? I mean,
I would have thought one thing, and at least the Labour Party is thinking about this now. One thing we certainly need is employee directors on boards they have in Germany and Scandinavia. There is you can vote to have one person on the board who is not a fat cat or a chum of the chairman or a chum of the chief executive. Because that, to go back to my argument about the importance of processes and constitutions and actually having effective measures in place, that is someone you can go to. Yeah. If you have a Fred Goodwin, you could a sort of a cult of the supreme manager, a dictator of the boardroom. There is someone there who you can go to and raise concerns with. I was going to say be a member of the trade union, but trade unions just seem to be dying out in the private sector. Yeah. And also, in a funny way, the British trade union movement isn't very good on freedom of speech. There are lots of people who are fired from the National Health Service for speaking out on matters of public health, which you'd have thought, is something we ought to encourage people to do. And the unions aren't very good at defending it. Yeah. But also, it's a cultural change. I mean, after the crash we've been through, I really do feel we need an anti-managerial culture in Britain. That if you have managers, or indeed vice-chancellors, who cannot take criticism, who demand respect on pain of punishment, we ought to have a culture that, well, clearly you're unfit to be a manager. Clearly you're not up to this job if you have to surround yourself with flatterers and cannot hear dissent. Clearly you're just not up to it. You should be doing something else.
Do you think there's a sort of courage you were dismissing about writers in a way? You sort of, thought it was overblown a little bit that writers claimed courage. Do you think there is courage in reviewing culture, in book culture in general?
I'm not mocking it completely, but it's dangerous for citizens of Western democracies to pretend that they're some kind of dissenter, as if they're akin to people in Belarus or Iran or Syria now, when they're not. And the danger with overdoing it is that, as I said, that when you cannot admit to real fear, it actually takes courage to admit to fear sometimes. To just say, this is a threatening force, I'm naming it, I'm explaining why I'm not writing about it. At least that forces your audience to say, actually people are not speaking out because they're frightened. That puts it on the map. I mean, I've got a quote in my book from the great Grayson Perry, who in 2005 he does his pots. You must see his pots, they're wonderful pots, and he does lots of images on his pots that Catholics would find blasphemous, or a strict Catholic would find blasphemous. And he stood up at an arts meeting in 2005 and said, I don't do this with Islam because I'm frightened of getting my throat slit. And also because I don't know where the lines are, which goes back to my point about going postal, random violence. If you don't know where the line is, if you don't know how far you can go and you can't go any further, everything becomes dangerous. But Grayson saying that, this was considered such a remarkable thing for British artists to say. It was stories all over the press about it. When in fact he was just stating the obvious. So I'm not saying people aren't brave and people don't do difficult things and mock it, but I think this pretense that British writers, British intellectuals, are somehow leaders of the French resistance is not only false, but it's dangerous because it means they can't speak out when they should speak out.
Yeah. Okay. I'll pass it out to the audience now. Any questions? Hands up. Up the back there.
What do you think of the notion that if you change the rules, if you change, for example, the laws of libel in the United Kingdom, how far that would get at what's going to be the burden of your talk, which is that people will still adhere to the law of anticipated reaction, especially where that reaction is likely to be negative? Yes.
Well, I'm a sort of slightly left of centre, moderate reformer. So I always think that anything you can get, you should take. Yes, that would be true. And a lot of threats to freedom of speech have got nothing to do with state and nothing to do with the law. It has actually been a scandal in Britain that we have had actual criminals like Robert Maxwell, who some of you here will be too young and indeed too fortunate to remember. His house, his old mansion on Hedsing Hill, he was just a complete criminal and a bully and a bombast and a slob. And he was able to use the libel laws when he owned the Daily Mirror to stop any kind of investigative journalism into his business, to threaten it. You knew if you wrote about Maxwell, you had £100,000 legal costs. This is in the early 1990s when £100,000 was considerably more money than it is now. We've had Russian oligarchs. We've had, my favourite one is this. There's a Danish tabloid called Ekstrabladet, who in 2006, it started looking at these Icelandic banks that were buying up most of Britain, half of Europe. They said, hold on a second, Icelandic banks, they're just banks on a pile of volcanic rock whose only resources are geysers and cod. How can they afford all this money? Good journalistic question. Good journalists always say, this isn't right. And so they wrote about these banks, one bank, Kaupthing's dealings with the Russian oligarchy offshore tax havens. These Icelandic bankers, this is the height of the boom, I guess used to business journalists gasping at them like sort of porn stars or something. Oh my God, aren't you wonderful? Sued in Denmark. They got nowhere. The Danish Press Complaints Commission threw that. It's a perfectly different piece of journalism. The next thing my friends on Extra Blood heard, they're being sued for libel in London because on the internet you could read a Danish paper in England. The costs of the case came to £1 million. It didn't even go to court. £1 million. And Extra Blood said, we just got to apologise. We can't, it will bankrupt our paper if we defend it. So they apologised. Virtually next week, the entire Icelandic banking system collapses, sending Iceland back to the Middle Ages almost, so it seemed like, for a couple of weeks. British taxpayers, British investors, British local authorities, for all I know, British universities had money in the Icelandic banks. They lost every single penny of it. Now, it strikes, there's no shame in British legal circles that this has happened, and the fact that the British law could be used to silence a Danish paper writing out an Icelandic bank meant other people were frightened of writing about Icelandic banks. But it strikes me as an advance worth having if we can reform the libel law in this country so that can never bloody happen again. We won't get rid of lots and lots of problems. We'll get rid of one specific problem. And that's in the way how liberal societies move. They see something grossly wrong, and they have a fight, and they change it.
At the back.
Most of the examples you gave us of what I would call an inhibition of publishing or saying things that you would want to say have not been governmental.
No, they haven't.
They have been powerful bodies.
Yeah.
You haven't said, and I wonder what your position is, whether a state has a right to have, let us say, an Official Secrets Act, or to have rules for its employees which would prevent Wikipedia getting hold of the stuff it got hold of and published?
WikiLeaks, yes. Yes, it does. But they are rights that must be tested. So, for instance, we have a very good protection of rights in Britain. It's called the jury. There have been two big leakers of British government secrets. The first, in the past decade, the first was Catherine Gunn, who worked at GCHQ, and she leaked the details of how, in the run-up to the Iraq War, British intelligence was tapping Kofi Annan's phone at the United Nations, produced one of the best private eye covers I've ever seen of Claire Short confronting a distraught Kofi Annan on the steps of the UN, and Kofi Annan saying, "No one listens to a word I say," and Claire saying, "Well, that's not true." And the other was Derek Pascal in the Foreign Office, who just leaked how, as Labour got deeper and deeper in with the Muslim Brotherhood, how bizarre Labour's dealings were with radical Islam. And again, Derek leaked documents after. I mean, people couldn't keep up with the number of documents Derek was leaking. Now, both were charged under the Official Secrets Act. And the government was, they were open and shut cases in law. But the government took them to the steps of the court, and in both cases dropped the prosecution, because they were frightened that a jury will say, well, we're interested in justice and not the law, we will find not guilty. The jury seems a very good protection of that. I mean, it's a good thing to ask when governments try and keep secrets. Would a jury agree with you on this? And if they wouldn't, as they didn't in either Pascal or the Gunn case, then the government just backed off. I don't, as for WikiLeaks, here's why we go back to what you said. If I'd written this book 50 years ago, let's say 70 years ago, the height of the Europe of the dictators, the British centralised state that had fought the Second World War, I would have written an awful lot about government censorship, also an awful lot about the power of the media barons. I mean, now we're in a far more diverse and far more privatised world, and as you said, in democracies, the threat of censorship, you can't really say it's just the state. You can't really say it's media barons and the BBC having tight control because they don't have control in the age. But what that means is that people need to argue for the best values for freedom of speech. Because you look at WikiLeaks, I mean, there are the rape and sexual abuse allegations against Assange, who's got him hiding in the basement of the Venezuelan embassy. I frankly think a Swedish prison might be more comfortable than that. But you know, those are matters for a court. I can't be judged. We do know for a fact that WikiLeaks had 250,000 pages of documents from the American State Department, and these included dissidents and dictatorships who had just spoken to officials from the American embassy, and American embassy probably didn't love, just gave them a cup of tea or quite nice to them, not much they could do for them. And WikiLeaks and Assange then prints, without cutting out their names, he prints every name of every dissident who's spoken to American official, whether it's in Belarus or Ethiopia. In other words, he's handing arrest lists to the secret police force of that country. And that strikes me as a wholly illegitimate use of freedom of publication, that comfortable people in Western countries can put better and braver people than them in danger. Now, as WikiLeaks showed, it's virtually impossible to stop in the Internet age. What you need is far stronger liberal cultures that say, well, actually, you know, we don't want to hand over Belarusian dissidents to KGB. It is something, you know, it develops a taboo against behaviour like that.
This is more of a comment than a question, but a couple of times in your piece you used scientific inquiry as a sort of paradigm. And I'm just intrigued because I mean my sort of limited understanding of parameters of scientific inquiry would also suggest that in our modern age it is censored. It's censored both by the fact that much sort of cutting edge research is hugely expensive and dependent upon funding from outside sources, and also subject to ethics committees. So, for example, especially in sort of the biological sciences, the parameters of what can be done and what can be
Yeah.
debated are actually decided. You know, research is, in the broader sense, censored.
Oh,
So-
yeah, sorry.
So I'm just intrigued as
No,
to
no, I mean,
when you're using this paradigm.
No, I wasn't so much thinking of. I mean, obviously, you know, it's rooted in reality. It's rooted in the material world. I mean, someone in here couldn't go to the government and demand £5 billion for an experiment. That I totally accept. What I was thinking was more of debate rather than research. That in an argument, it is not good enough to say, I am the professor, I am the Nobel Prize, I'm a Nobel Prize winner of physics, therefore I'm right. There is no appeal to authority in an argument. In scientific argument, you have to prove it. I admit this is an ideal rather than something that scientists always follow in practice. Richard Dawkins tells this rather affecting story of a lecturer at the Oxford Zoology Department who is a young lecturer, and he was giving an account of a cell structure. And this cell structure had been highly controversial. And there were two views, and he gave one view. At the end of it all, an old professor, who no one realised in the room, walked up the lecture and everyone went, oh my God, that's Professor Jones, he's been arguing the opposite view all his life. And the old professor just goes to Mike and said, I must thank you so much for that talk. I now realise I've been talking nonsense for 15 years. Now, that is the ideal of science. It's not always followed in practice. It's not always followed in practice in the arts. But would you want to say, you wouldn't say, you would find it outrageous that you would have laws restricting what scientists can argue about or what academics can argue about. You wouldn't accept. Right.
Scientific argument is predicated upon scientific research.
Yeah,
And
which
we do
is
have
bound by economics and is bound by
ethics committees, etc.
yeah.
So therefore, the net result is that scientific argument is censored. You know, very few people, you know, you get a group of physicists in the room, the argument is not going to be about maths. You know,
Yeah.
You know, if this was, you know, determined as a corporate group a long time ago. You know,
Wouldn't-
it's the boundaries that produce the argument, and that is, and the boundaries of where the research happens.
One of the problems with it was a pig of a book to organise this, actually. It really was, because you talk about freedom of speech, and it can suddenly be everything. You know, everything is freedom of speech. So what I concentrate on is censorship that hurts, censorship that can kill you, censorship that can destroy your career, censorship that can get you put in prison. And to do that, you have to make certain dividing lines. You can say, for instance, the fact that, well, since the crash and with government cuts, there's going to be a lot less government money for hard scientific research, particularly, as you say, we seem to live in an age where it costs more and more, whether it finds out more and more, whether big science projects are actually the best way forward is another matter. You could say that's censorship. You could say, to use the example when I was saying that, you know, any man who said whatever came across his mind to everyone he met, everyone said the first thing that came in their head, you know, you're stupid, you're ugly, you smell, can I have sex with you? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, all of that. It's almost impossible. So you can say there's no such thing as freedom of speech. Or you can say that censorship covers everything. The danger with that is that we know the difference between organisations and societies where you have some freedom and those that you don't. And there's a danger, you get it inevitably with French philosophers, but also sort of postmodernists in America. There's an American academic called Stanley Fish who wrote a book called There's No Such Thing as Freedom of Speech and a Jolly Good Thing Too. And essentially he's arguing for, if I disagree with Simon, I've got every right to be a hypocrite because I'm right and he's wrong. It's a language of civil war. He's generally justifying the culture wars in America. So he's saying that, you know, if someone is a right-wing conservative in America, I'm damn right I'm going to take away his freedom of speech. Damn right I'm going to solve problems because I'm right and I know I'm right. Now, arguing against that, you just simply have to say, well, you wouldn't like it to happen to you. And societies where that happen end up not being free. And equally, you have to say, if you're concerned about censorship in Britain and the wider world, you have to say, well, yep, you're right. If government funding for physics is cut, there'll be less material, there'll be less room for argument. If universities are closed in Britain, as Simon's saying they might be soon, there will be less argument. That's a type of censorship. If people in this room can't scream abuse at their neighbours, if social constraints hold them back, that's a type of censorship. But it's not censorship that kills people. It's not censorship that hurts. So that's it. That's the dividing line in my book.
Okay, that seems like a natural end. Thank you so much to Nick Cohen. He'll be outside signing books, so please, and enjoy a tea and coffee from our sponsors, Blackwell's. Thanks ever so much for coming. Thank you to Nick Cohen for a stimulating speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well done.